Welcome back to the deep dive. We always say we like to dig into the really interesting stuff, and, well, today's no different. We asked you guys to send in anything that caught your eye, and you definitely delivered. We got this fascinating economic analysis from some Korean financial experts.
Yeah, it's really a unique perspective on some of the recent U.S. economic news and how the markets have been reacting to it, particularly around things like inflation and potential tariffs, things that are really top of mind for a lot of folks.
For sure. And we're going to try to make sense of it all. We're talking about those surprise retail numbers from January, the inflation picture, which, let's be honest, always feels a bit confusing. And then, of course, we'll dive into the drama surrounding those proposed tariffs. And we're going to see all of this through the lens of experts who are watching it unfold in real time halfway across the world.
Right, and it just shows you how interconnected things really are.
Okay, so let's kick things off with those retail sales numbers from January. Economists were predicting growth, right? But instead, we got a 0.9% decrease.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big miss. At first glance, it might seem like a reason to worry, but the Korean analysts are suggesting we might want to hold off on hitting that panic button just yet.
Oh, so what do they see that maybe others are missing?
Well, they point to a few unusual factors that would have played a role. Think about it. We had those wildfires in California and all that severe weather across much of the U.S. That probably disrupted both consumer spending and supply chains, don't you think?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even with all the data and fancy models, it's a good reminder that real-world stuff can still really mess things up.
Oh, absolutely. And it seems like the Korean markets are reading it that way, too. Their reaction to the U.S. retail news was pretty muted. They're much more focused on those potential tariffs,
I see it because their economy is so reliant on exports.
Exactly. Their analysis highlights how much their economy depends on those technology exports, which aren't as directly tied to U.S. consumer spending. So they're more worried about potential disruptions to global supply chains caused by tariffs.
So it's almost like two different perspectives on the same event. So for our listeners out there, if you're heavily invested in U.S. retail, maybe this is something to keep an eye on, but maybe don't panic just yet. There could be more to the story. All right, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the other big puzzle, inflation.
Right. It's definitely been a persistent headline. And, like the Korean analysis points out, this isn't just a U.S. thing. They're seeing these inflationary pressures across the globe.
So it's a global party, and inflation crashed it. But seriously, what are the Korean analysts saying about what's driving this trend?
Well, they point to something pretty fundamental: strong employment. As long as people have jobs and money to spend, it's going to put upward pressure on prices.
Yeah, that's that classic supply and demand, right? But there was one detail that really stood out to me in their analysis: a 44% surge in egg prices.
Oh, yeah, that definitely jumps out. And they're having this globally, too. Seems like everybody's feeling the pain at the grocery store these days.
No kidding. My omelets are becoming a luxury. Okay, but on a more serious note, this brings up an interesting point that the Korean analysts are wrestling with. They suggest that if we want to really get inflation under control, it might actually require a weaker job market.
Right, which raises a tough question. What's more important, low inflation or job security? There's no easy answer there. It's something policymakers are really struggling with.
It's a tough one for sure. It just highlights how these economic forces have real-world consequences, even on something as basic as the price of eggs.
Absolutely. It speaks to those ripple effects that we see in a global economy.
Okay, let's move on to another factor with a lot of potential to cause ripples: those proposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. And this is where the Korean perspective gets really interesting.
Right, because South Korea, as a major exporter of cars and semiconductors, is right in the middle of all this trade tension.
Like they're caught in the crossfire of this game of economic chess, and each country's trying to make these strategic moves to protect themselves. So do these Korean analysts offer any predictions on how this could all play out?
They do, and it's pretty thought-provoking. First, they say these tariffs could actually backfire on the U.S. and lead to higher prices for American consumers, across the board.
Oh, wow. So not just those imported cars and electronics getting more expensive, but everything else too.
Exactly. And their second point is that these tariffs might be more about leverage in trade negotiations than the tariffs themselves. Like maybe it's a tactic to pressure other countries into trade deals that are more favorable to the U.S.
So it's less about the immediate impact of the tariffs and more about the long game, how it could reshape global trade down the road.
Yeah, that's a key takeaway from their analysis.
Which, of course, makes you wonder, how is this all going to play out? And what's it going to mean for our listeners? For their wallets, I mean.
Well, that's what we're going to explore next. We're going to dive into the Korean analysts' outlook on the U.S. market and see what they think it all means for investors.
It's interesting how the Korean analysis really gets you thinking about inflation differently. Like, we always hear about it from the consumer side, oh no, prices are going up. But they're looking at the bigger picture, how prices, employment, and wages all play together.
Yeah, that's a great point. It reminds us that economics is like this web of interconnected things. What helps businesses and workers might actually make inflation worse. And then trying to control inflation too much, well, that might end up hurting job growth.
Right, it's like walking a tightrope. So how do central banks like the Fed even decide what to do? Do they focus on fighting inflation even if it slows the economy down? Or do they try to keep the job market strong and just accept higher prices?
Yeah, it's a tough call for sure. And, this actually brings us back to the Korean analysts' outlook on the U.S. market. It's kind of interesting. They're cautiously optimistic, but they're really stressing the importance of being selective.
So they're not saying run for the hills, sell everything, but they are saying investors need to be a lot more strategic.
Exactly. And what I found really fascinating is their take on what kinds of stocks to look at in this environment. They're suggesting maybe it's time to shift away from those mega cap stocks that have been, dominating the market for the last few years.
So maybe look beyond the big, well-known companies.
Right. They see more potential in smaller companies, especially the ones with strong earnings, a clear advantage over their competitors, and, a good growth story.
So it's almost like finding those hidden gems, the companies that maybe got overlooked when everyone was focused on the big players. But that begs the question, how do you even find those companies?
Well, that's where the real work comes in. It's not about just blindly following the index or chasing the latest trends. You got to do your research, understand the company's fundamentals, really assess their long-term potential.
So it's not just about picking stocks, it's about understanding the whole picture, right? Seeing the potential risks and opportunities and figuring out how to adjust your strategy.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots and trying to get a sense of where things are headed, both the world and the markets.
And being open to new ideas and perspectives, which is what this Korean analysis is all about. It really shows how looking beyond our own borders can help us better understand the global economy and the financial markets.
Absolutely. But I think this deep dive also makes you think about something bigger. Do we really grasp how interconnected everything is?
Yeah, that's a big one. We tend to get caught up in what's happening in our own little world, our country, our neighborhood. But this Korean analysis reminds us that things that happen on the other side of the world, whether it's a retail slump in the U.S. or egg prices going crazy in Asia, can impact everyone.
And those connections go way beyond just trade. We're talking about these intricate global supply chains, the interconnectedness of the financial markets, the constant flow of information and ideas. It can be pretty mind-boggling.
Which makes it even more important to seek out different perspectives, to question what we think we know, and to be willing to learn from others.
I couldn't agree more. We can't just stay in our own little bubble. We have to be open to new information, new ideas, and new ways of seeing things.
Because if we only ever see things from one angle, we're going to miss important insights and make decisions that could have consequences we didn't anticipate.
Especially in a world that's changing so fast. Being able to adapt and rethink things is crucial.
So for our listeners who are trying to navigate this complex global economy and make smart decisions, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from this deep dive?
I'd say don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone, explore different viewpoints, talk to people from different backgrounds, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Yeah, it's like a reminder to always be learning, right?
Exactly. And when it comes to investing, well, that means staying ahead of the game, making those decisions that are going to pay off in the long run. For you, your business, your investments.
For sure. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this Korean analysis. I don't know about you, but I found it really interesting.
Me too. I think this is a perfect example of why we do what we do, exploring different points of view, finding those hidden insights, trying to understand how this crazy global economy works.
Exactly. We really believe that knowledge is power. You know what I mean? The more we understand about the world, the better we can navigate it all. Deal with the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities.
Absolutely, and we hope the listeners feel the same way.
Definitely. So if you're out there listening and you found this analysis as interesting as we did, we encourage you to check out the original reports. We'll make sure to include a link in the show notes. See what jumps out at you, what makes you think differently, what sparks your curiosity.
Because in the end, it's not just about taking in information, right? It's about thinking critically, forming your own opinions, and then using that knowledge to make good decisions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, we'll be back soon with another deep dive. A whole new set of sources, new perspectives. Who knows what we'll uncover next? Until then, keep those brains working and those portfolios diversified. 2CC